you first go into it and you're like, I'm going to make my own schedule and, I'm going to be working less than 40 hours a week. No, I'm working like 70, 80 hours a week sometimes, So I think just being a little bit more of guarding myself a little bit more and saying no to a few more a few things that come up when I know I'm already pushing myself. That was something that, I wish that I had started a little bit sooner in my journey.
Welcome to the Before You Say I Do podcast. This podcast helps wedding couples learn industry secrets about the wedding industry and the various wedding vendors in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia areas. My name is Joshua Buxton, and I am your host. With over 7 years as a professional wedding videographer, I have filmed many weddings all over the United States and hope to help wedding couples find the right vendors before they say I do. Welcome to Before You Say I Do podcast. I'm Joshua Buxton with Buxton Media Productions. Today, I have Christa Rae Photography. She's here to talk to us about what she does, how she does it, and her photography journey. Christa, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So tell me a little bit about how you got started with photography, but especially wedding photography.
Yeah, it was a long journey for me. It really started in high school. I joined my high school's newspaper team, and they needed more, people to take photos. And I really connected with the photo editor when I had joined the newspaper. And I was always the friend that had the camera, that was taking pictures of all of our shenanigans and all of that. So
you have to have somebody do
yes,
it, right?
That was me out of the friend group. So, I always had my camera on me anyway. And so I decided, let me pick this up and joined the newspaper team. And then my love for, I thought I wanted to be a journalist at first. And then it quickly shifted to photography as my passion. And decided to study that in college and started my business right after. With weddings specifically, I think with a lot of people in the industry, it starts with a friend asking you
yes.
to,
yep. Or
do
a family
their wedding.
member or
yes,
somebody.
Yes, someone because when I when I graduated college, my goal was, and the first thing that I was doing with photography was concert photography. So very
so very event-oriented, but
similar but different.
Yeah.
And so I had a friend that was and he actually was in the photo program with me at Towson University, and he was like, I want you to photograph my wedding. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. Let me get some experience under my belt. It was about several months away when he had asked me. So I was like, okay, let me get some experience under my belt, and then I'll, photograph your wedding. And started second shooting a bit to, get the feel of it, and then photographed his wedding. And from there, it just kind of took off. I always worked in photo after college. I was working at photo labs and worked at Six Flags as
oh my goodness,
with
really?
Kodak, supervising everyone taking the pictures of you with the characters and selling the roller coaster pictures and
there's a lot of sales to that. From what I have a friend of mine who does photography, or she's a colleague of mine, but she did photography on the cruise liners, and she said it was a lot of sales.
Yeah.
She'd take the photos, but she's like, come buy this photo. So I can only imagine that's a lot similar at Six Flags.
Yes. So every job that I had, after post-graduation was very photo oriented. And then once, weddings started to really take off for me. And from there, I left my full-time job, and the year that I left my full-time job, I went from shooting 17 weddings to 40 weddings. It was a huge jump, just because I was able to then, devote all the time to it. Yeah.
That's awesome. So how was that? That's such a, it's kind of a pretty common theme, is where somebody starts off in a full-time job and photography or it's something in weddings. It's kind of a part-time thing, but that shift to going full-time, that's a scary shift because you're really hoping it works, right? So can you talk a little bit more about, that big shift of what made you want to go from doing this kind of a side gig to going full-time?
Yeah. Well, I knew that what I was doing full time wasn't going to be, my forever job. Like my goal was, I'm doing this now to support me starting my business, kind of. So the end goal was always to leave and make the shift. And, it was scary kind of thinking about it because, you don't know what the next year has in store, especially when you're starting out and everything. So leaving that safety net and then just jumping ahead. But it was the best decision ever because I could not manage 40 weddings and a full-time job. But I mean, again, it was in photo. I worked at a photo lab and yeah.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool. It's always kind of it's an interesting thing when, some of the guests I've had here, they talk about that shift from part-time to full-time, and they all say it's one of the best things they've ever done, So can you talk a little bit more about let's talk about some of the couples you've worked with and what are some of the more memorable weddings that you've been a part of?
Wow.
So many.
I'm really thankful for the couples that I get to work with. They're all so great. They're really like my people. And I feel like, especially after, going full time and everything, you're able to really get a feel for the couples that you jive with and, the ones that don't necessarily. And I feel like, shaping your website and everything based on your own personality attracts, the couples that, make a day super memorable and, you're part of their family and you're their friend and they're just kind of documenting everything.
So thinking of some unique weddings, what is something that maybe stands out to you that, a wedding couple does or, during the day that was more unique than what other wedding couples have done?
Yeah. I think, as far as uniqueness, just really tailoring it to who the couple are, really adding in touches. I love couples. I've had couples that combine beers, two different beers is their unity thing, or they mix a cocktail in, things that are and it's always their favorite cocktail that they make together. Adding kind of stuff in that really that kind of stands out to me, and it really helps show who they are through in a ceremony and where it can just be traditional vows, but I really love when couples bring those aspects in.
Yeah, I think it's really special when, I've been to a couple of weddings where there's more unique things going on. It's not the traditional wedding. It's more special to that couple.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's more memorable to them later too, is when they put more of their personalities into the wedding and not just do what everybody's telling them to do.
Yep.
And I think that's a really great way to make your wedding very unique, and to set yourself apart from all the other weddings that are out there. And it's I've seen a lot of weddings, and I love the weddings that are very personable to them, their own beer or their own cocktail, order or the groom cocktail or the bride cocktail. It's those are really cool things. When it comes to the bridal journey to finding a photographer, how far out do they usually reach out to you from their wedding day? What's a very common time frame that you see?
Yeah, typically 1.5 years out.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so much different than the videography. Oh, yeah. That's really cool because then now you have more time to work with them, right?
Yes, yeah. I really get to know them. I love the whole journey with them. And I always tell all of my couples, please use me as a resource because typically I'm the next thing after the venue.
Right.
A lot of them will have just venue or a planner. then next thing's photography. So getting to be on that journey with them and everything, and help them shape their, vendor dream team, and just kind of help them, if I've shot at their venue a lot, giving them like advice and things like that. And also part of that journey is their engagement session and working with them on that. And that's where I really get to know my couples and have some fun with them before, and establish a comfort level throughout, between that time.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's really unique for you, and photography, is you get that extra session with them for the engagement session,
Yeah.
So you really get to know your couple so far out. And that's really important, I think, for a lot of wedding couples to understand is like with the photographer, you're going to get to know your photographer well in advance. So when it's, and I've always noticed this when I show up to a wedding day, how much the photographer is already comfortable with the couple. And I'm still trying to help break that a little bit. It definitely takes us a little bit more time, but that's really cool and unique about, with what you offer is that engagement session way in advance of the actual wedding day. So that's really cool. What are some tips or tricks that, that you could tell wedding couples that, when they're looking for a wedding photographer, like, why is it a year and a half out? Why do you work with your photographer, like with scheduling and like coming up with like all the things that really will help make their day really special?
Yeah. I mean, not only do we book up really quickly, thinking about what you want to use, like if engagement session photos for, like some of them use them for save the date, some of them are decor, things like that. Save the dates have to go out like 6 to 8 months before. So kind of having your photographer booked before that, and also kind of thinking of like what kind of season you want to do that in, all that kind of plays a factor into when you need to like book your photographer. The further you book them out, the more flexibility you have with like when and, when you can schedule your engagement session and things like that. And again, just kind of building that trust and having rapport beforehand. And working on like timeline stuff, and because I find that a lot of vendors, like hair and makeup that you wouldn't think have anything to do with like the photo, because we show up and they're pretty much done, but they do need to know like our timeline and stuff like that. So I think that we play a very big role in helping them build timelines and fill out their day, and kind of, help the other vendors as well. Yeah,
I mean, you talk about a really good point here, which is like the timeline of the day. And I can never emphasize enough to couples having a good timeline. Can you talk a little bit more about how you help guide the couples? Because some of the things you and I both have dealt with in this industry is like couples try to squeeze as much as they can into a short timeline, but they don't realize how long certain things take. And one of the things I know that take the most time is family photo sessions. So if you could tell couples out there how important it is to give buffer for those things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yes.
So true.
Yes. Well, I can say that I have a pretty good grasp when I look at a family photo list that a couple sends to me. I can look at it and be like, okay, yep, this will take like 15 minutes. And then there are others where I'm like, this is going to be like 30, 40 minutes.
Right.
There's a lot of tips regarding that. Whether you're doing a first look or not, get some of it done beforehand.
Right.
Like your immediate family photos.
Yeah.
Like,
or bridal portraits, or, the group portraits and stuff like that. Yeah.
I don't think a lot of couples understand how early photographers do need to start their day. I feel like that's a discussion that I have to have with couples a lot is, you want to have your photographer there at least, at a minimum 3 hours before your ceremony start time.
Right.
If you want those prep photos, and then if you want to enjoy some of your cocktail hour and you're doing a first look, like we need to build that time in the beginning. And a lot of them are so thankful for that. And then, after the ceremony is when like we do those bigger extended family photos. And one thing that really helps is filling everybody in on the game plan of when and where they have the photos taken on the wedding day. So we're not corralling everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part is after a ceremony, everybody wants to disperse and go to cocktail hour. But what they don't realize is there's like 20 minutes set aside for family photos. And now you got to go sit in the best man to go corral all the family members like, oh, we need you back. And but it, and something I've seen with a lot of successful weddings too is like having, like a second photographer or second videographers, like these additional people to help like corral the people, get them in order and get them ready to go. And, that is something that is very key to like a successful day of like for us to film and take photos and everything.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So on average, like, do you usually try to push a lot of your couples to make sure that you have a second photographer there, or do all your weddings have second photography?
Yeah, I would say the majority of them do book with a second photographer. It's definitely like, I think a lot of couples come into the discussion knowing that they should have one. Yeah. It's nothing that I really need to, talk them into or anything like that. The main question is just kind of who are the second photographers, and like who the second photographer is, and what would be the pros of having a second photographer.
So if you could tell like couples, say you had a couple on a phone call and you were trying to explain to them some key things that why a second photographer is needed, because sometimes I feel like I have to explain that, especially to couples are like, why do we need two videographers? And I do struggle sometimes like to explain it to a wedding couple why it's important. So and I'm curious with you, like, how do you approach that with wedding couples? Like, these are the reasons why I need a second photographer for this. Yeah,
well, first question I ask is, where are you guys getting ready? And,
separate locations.
Yep. That's, a main factor. As well as, I ask them one question that I find stumps a lot of couples and that I've really enjoyed asking because the answers that I get is really awesome, is when you go to open up your gallery for the first time when you receive it, what are the photos that you are envisioning seeing, and what are the things that you are going to skip to and like that you are looking forward to seeing in your gallery. And from there I can kind of gauge the type of coverage that they want and the photos that they're envisioning. And then from there I explain to them how me as well as a second photographer can capture like the moments and the photos and stuff that they're already envisioning.
Oh, that's actually really incredible. That's a great way to approach it, I think. I always try to do that with couples as well, as like, what is the video that you want to see 20 years from now?
Yes.
Not just 6 months from now, but what is something you want to show to your kids, your grandkids? What are the things you wish you had? The memories that you wish you could relive again. Yeah. And I think that's a really powerful way to like get wedding couples to like really envision what it is they really need and want from the wedding day.
Yes.
So talking a little bit let's talk about style. Like, what are some new trends and things that you're seeing?
Yes.
Like so let's start with the things that you're seeing that you're enjoying that are coming out. And then we'll talk a little bit about the things you're glad are gone at this point. But let's talk about the first set. Okay. What are some new trends that you're seeing that you're really enjoying?
Yeah. I'm really liking this like 90s kind of like feel and trend of like the direct flash type of photos.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That couples are getting into. I wouldn't shoot a whole wedding like that. But it is really fun to see how like kind of incorporating it a bit into the reception and, doing some separate portraits of them, especially with the trend of like, at least the bride changing an outfit, or, one of the people getting married changing their outfits during the reception, things like that. That creates another like kind of portrait hour and kind of incorporating that into the 90s direct flash.
Yeah.
When it first happened, I was very confused because I'm like, I went to college and learned how to, do all this stuff with off-camera flash, and now it's like very direct and not what I was taught. But it's been fun leaning into it. I've really enjoyed that, and that's something that couples are like asking for and setting a little bit of time in the reception for.
That's awesome. So what are some things that were trendy and that you're glad are gone or kind of going away?
Okay. I think a lot of couples have come to the realization that like the very dark and moody filter over photos is going to be dated. And that's something that I've always, kind of said when it saw like it's really pretty. I love, the photographers that I know that do it and everything. But these are the photos that you want to portray how the day was, and you pick out all these colors and everything, and to alter it for a certain mood or like what's trendy. I'm kind of glad that is going out, because I'm finding a lot of couples now are like, I'm very drawn to a classic and timeless style. And that's been my thing since I started. And because I started in kind of photojournalism and everything.
Right.
So to alter that, I thought was such a shame for a little bit. But I'm very ready to say goodbye to that.
I think some things are very trendy and they're good for the year. But when you start thinking about things like photos and video, you got to think beyond that year of like, it may be trendy, but 10, 20 years, are you really going to want that?
Yeah.
With like flowers and dresses and things like that, that could be trendy, and that's just the day of. But, granted, with the dress, like that's going to be in your photos and your video too. But we all know that dresses are also trendy. And like, if you were to look at dresses from the 90s, you'd be horrendous. Like, horrified by some of the styles that were back then, but hairstyles and things like that. But all that stuff does change, which is great for good reasons.
Yes.
But no, that's an interesting one, to hear about something that you're kind of glad to see go to the wayside. But that's really interesting. So talking a little bit about, most of your couples are getting to about a year and a half in advance, right? At what point do you start reaching out to them to really nail down a schedule? Because I know that's something that for us on the video side, like, we do work with photographers all the time to like make sure that we are on the same page with schedules and everything. Yeah. And I'm really curious to know from the photography side, like how soon do you actually start working with the couples? Like, we need to start nailing down a schedule. What's that time frame look like?
Yeah. I would say about, 1.5 to 2 months out.
Okay.
I want to make sure that the venue and, if they have a planner, got to make sure that, they're the first step. And then photography is the next thing. So just kind of plugging that in. But I find around the 1.5 to 2 month mark is when they, their planner or their venue is kind of wrapping up their like skeleton of the timeline. And then all of us other vendors kind of fill in everything. So I think that's a pretty good point when, we check back in and everything. And I work on photography like timelines with my couples and make sure that, down to the minute, they know, like everyone knows when and where they're needed for photos.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like spot on to exactly kind of what we do, is about 1 to 2 months out. And I feel like some couples appreciate waiting to that point, but some will reach out earlier. Like, when do we need to start talking about this? I was like, well, what do you know so far about your wedding day?
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'll kind of ask them like, well, do you have a photography schedule already? Because if you have a photography schedule, we can kind of just mimic a lot what's going on there.
Yep.
And just piggyback a little bit. There's some things where we may give some suggestions, but we never are pushy about it. That's for sure. So usually your schedule is so much clean and like is already pre-built, and you know exactly what you're doing. So those are like definitely things to be considering if you're a wedding couple out there, is like, think about 1 to 2 months out that you're going to actually reach out to your photographer, your videographers, and really start to narrow that schedule down, because they need to know too. And like, like we do before, is we will give advice, maybe there's not enough time between getting ready and going to the ceremony and starting getting details and things like that.
Yeah.
A lot of times they'll kind of crunch everything up, and we'll be like, okay, well, we need a little bit more time spaced out somehow. And that's where we kind of come in with our expertise and like tell them like, have you thought about this? Like let's think about like shifting this here. And for you, especially like when we talk about bridal portraits and things like that. Let's shift all those things earlier in a day and not after the ceremony, because after the ceremony, we can get to group photos and then you can go enjoy cocktail hour, you know, instead of like, it's all photos afterwards and then straight into reception, you know, and they don't get to enjoy the moment. So no, that's a really, really good point. Talk about schedules. So let's kind of shift a little bit and talk about, you know, working with photographers and videographers, the dynamics there. I know in our industry, there's some photographers and videographers that really do well with each other. And there's sometimes it kind of is like butting heads.
Yeah.
So what is that dynamic like for you usually? And like, how do you handle that with videographers that out there? If you could like even give some tips and tricks to videographers, like, hey, don't do these things.
Yeah.
You know, talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. This is an age-old tale of, you know, everyone thinks their photographer and videographer are going to feud. And I get asked that question all the time. Like, who do you recommend? Like things like that. You know, the key is communication and playing like we're all on the same team. At the end of the day, we're creating something beautiful for our couples. So, you know, we shouldn't be standing in the way of each other doing that at all. And just communicating and going over timelines and, you know, making sure, because, you know, sometimes I work with videographers where it's just them and I have a second. And so we're able to shoot two things going on at the same time, but like, you know, trying to talk to them so that, you know, they can get groom prep and, you know,
been down that road.
Like, the other
that's
prep.
Not fun.
So, you know, just kind of coordinating with them, making sure that they're able to get what, you know, they can. And I'd say photographers and videographers, you know, I really like when we kind of like are, especially like when it's dance floor time and things like that, like we're next to each other. Like I want to be next to you. I want you next to me. That way we know we're not in each other's shots.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes. I don't know. Like I feel like in receptions, especially, like I'm constantly aware of like, where's the photographer? Where's the photographer? Okay. I'm not in their shot, you know, because if I see that flash comes up, I'm like jumping out of the way really quick as I can, because you know, you're right. Like I want to work with the photographer. Like there's nothing worse than when you have vendors that are butting heads for no reason. Yeah. You know, like we're all on the same team for this. Like we're all just trying to get the best moments of the day for the couple. That's all it's about. And so you're right. Like I agree with you. Like I like to be on the same side as the photographer as much as possible so that we're not in each other's shots. Yes. And like, again, you know, there's no reason to have to work against each other. It's better when you work with each other.
Exactly.
And good communication is another key. And like, I don't know if you ever get videographers that reach out to you before the wedding day to like, hey, I just want to introduce myself. Like, you know, I like to do that because I like to make sure that we have good, clear communication before a wedding day.
Yes.
It makes things so much easier.
Yeah.
And you show up with a good, positive day than showing up like, well, this is my spot. I'm going to be here, you know, like, do not get in front of me.
Yes. And I have to say, I really appreciate that you did that because it doesn't happen as often as you would think. I typically don't get a lot of videographers like emailing beforehand.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When you sent that, I was like, oh, wow, awesome. Well, now I can, you know, I know his email and I can send you that timeline and the details and everything. And you know what I plan to be shooting, so you can figure out your schedule.
Yeah, I think now I'm like, man, a lot of videographers are missing out there. If they're not if you're not reaching out to the photographers, you're missing out on a lot, I think. I think you're missing out on opportunities to one, get a good schedule, because I've even had couples give me a schedule that was different than the photographer, and it like made me realize like something's wrong here. But also, you know, like just having good, clear communication, like getting a phone number from them, and like the day of the ceremony, like if we're getting ready, and like so I've had photographers reach out to me because I reach out to them early, like, hey, the groom's not ready yet. You know, they're going to actually get ready over here, and I'm like, oh my goodness, thank you so much. Like I will get there as soon as I can. And it's just, it really helps the couple out so much. So it kind of makes me sad to know that videographers aren't reaching out more, but it makes me feel good that at least I'm doing it.
There's some, but like it's not as often as you would think. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. So, all right. So usually I like to wrap these things up with one last question at the end. And it's a question of, what is something you wish you could tell yourself when you first started wedding photography? What is one thing you're like, I wish I could go back into time and tell myself to do this differently?
Wow. Hmm. You know, aside from taking a lot on in a year, when I first started out, I was very like yes to everything. And you need to be that way
You have
when
to
you
start out
first
that
start
way.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, you do miss out on a lot with this type of career because we're working weekends and we also are working during the week. Surprise, surprise, surprise couples. But
Yeah, a lot of us actually have 2 jobs.
but it's like, there's a lot of editing during the week and, speak with the couples, a lot of work, during the week. So, you first go into it and you're like, I'm going to make my own schedule and, I'm going to be working less than 40 hours a week. No, I'm working like 70, 80 hours a week sometimes, So I think like, just being a little bit more of like, guarding myself a little bit more and saying no to a few more a few things that come up when I know I'm like already pushing myself. That was something that, I wish that I had started a little bit sooner in my journey.
That's a really good point. Like being able to have that ability to say no to things, because a lot of times we do want to say yes to everything as much as possible, especially when we start off.
Yeah.
Because we were like, well, I'm just trying to build my portfolio and I'm like, I want to get all these, clients in and wedding couples. But there's a certain point where, in order to give your best and your all to the couples you do have, you have to say no to some.
Yes.
And that's a hard line, especially when you're starting out. But I think that's a good thing. Like if I could go back, I'd probably say the same exact thing.
Yeah, that switch in mentality from starving artist to,
right. Yeah.
like, no, actually.
It's going to be okay.
Yes.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
No. Well, thank you so much for
you.
being here on this podcast today.
Yeah.
It's great to learn more about what you do. Can you quickly tell everybody like where they can find you for your website if they're a wedding couple out there and they're looking for a photographer in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area, where can they reach you?
Yeah, so Instagram is a really great place to kind of see what I'm shooting. I kind of treat it as like a little bit of a blog. I kind of post a little bit of everything that I shoot there. So it's at Christa Rae Photography. And then my website is ChristaRaePhotography.com.
Super easy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Christa.
Yeah,
thank you for being here.
Joshua.
Thank you for joining us on Before You Say I Do podcast.
Yeah.
And we'll see you on the next one.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Before You Say I Do podcast. Make sure to subscribe, like, and follow our YouTube channel and podcast platforms.